So I had this video my YouTube recommended for about 2 weeks about some like rocket game that I'd never heard of, and I'd not really, didn't really pay much attention to it. And then after the KSP2 layoff announcement, I thought, okay, well let's have a look at what this is, and I was quite impressed actually. Impressed enough that I actually went and bought it myself. And I've been playing KSP since 2015, and following it for longer than that. And I thought it would be worth taking you through some of the major differences. So we'll have a look. So when you open up, this is the screen you see. Obviously, you would make a new game. The thing to notice is there appear to be bespoke 10 save slots. Obviously, I just made one here. So we'll have a look at what I've got in here. So this is the Space Center screen. Obviously, on the right you can see a rocket. That won't be there when you get this the first time. And there are six rooms here. These two, and then these two. This one and this one are the only ones that function at the moment. We'll start with this one. This is the Flight Control Center. This is a combination of like the map, the tracking station for KSP1, but also like the contracts or the astronauts complex. There are contracts in here. These are more milestone things. There are also these extended training things. This one I haven't done because I presume it's pretty much very basic, approaching docking, rendezvous, that kind of stuff. This is all stuff that if you've done KSP1, you'll understand. These three, however, you absolutely should do. There is a generic tutorial that comes when you first start the game up. Definitely do that because it will tell you where everything is and some of the different hotkeys and stuff. But these ones are really important because the building system in this game is not at all like KSP. It looks like it and has enough similarities that you will get very confused. Which I'll get onto in a minute. And then obviously we have the map section. And the most important thing to notice about this game is that it is real solar system by default. So this is the Earth, this is the Moon, and we have all the rest of the solar system. There are also several very interesting things. There are irregular moons and a bunch of dwarf planets. So if you want to go to Sedna, Eris, Maki, all this kind of stuff. We've also got Ceres and Vestas in here. If I turn on asteroids, not Vesta. So there are way more bodies by default. As you can see, Jupiter. There is no way to like recover craft, so these ones are just sort of sat on the ground. One thing that's really different here is all of the launches. There's only one launch complex. There is implied in other text in the game that there will be more than one, but at the moment there is only one, and it's sort of up here in the sort of the Russian area. This game is the lore of this game is just like the remnants of the Soviet space program is implied somewhere, but all of your launches will be polar, and obviously with KP1, 2, and Juno, which we'll get to later. All their launch sites are equatorial or near enough. So, I was never that hot on like inclined orbits in KSP1. Most because they were such a headache I couldn't be bothered. You will have to learn. Obviously, rendezvous and stuff is possible. This was a rendezvous spacecraft. I'd say the barrier to entry is a little bit higher on basic orbital stuff for this reason. So I'm going to take you to the building area. So I'm going to create a new spacecraft. Now when you arrive in the Space Center the first time, it will look something like this. The very basics of how the building system works is quite similar, but obviously this looks like the spaceplane hangar. But if you press B, actually I will turn on my keyboard highlights. If you press B, it will take you to this, and this has horizontal, vertical, or grid. Grid is mostly for horizontal stuff. As you can see, it stays with the part, but obviously you can pick this up and move it around, and that's going to make a giant mess. But also, if you press left Alt or Alt and left click, it will zoom in to the part you've selected. Obviously, I have been doing it like this because, for obvious reasons, this is very similar to how KSP 1 and 2 and Juno all work. So the first major difference with this game, and the one that has taken the most amount of time to get used to, is the building system is a really interesting idea, and the execution is pretty good on this idea. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense though, but it is very neat. So I'll sort of take you through it. So you'll see here on the top here we've got this brown point, and underneath we've got these three. Now you might be under the impression that you can put three things on there, and if I take a small thing, you absolutely can if I turn on the symmetry. But how do I put one big tank? Well, the thing is the attachment system in this game is based off these nodes up here. Or here on the right is the part list. It has everything. You can sort by pods, tanks, engines, yada yada, all these things. And you can do the same, but with the sockets. That's what this game calls it. So this single socket, obviously here is just a single, which is where I got this part from. You can see here, and you can also see when you mouse over on the parts, you can see the attachment types underneath. So we can see that we've got one somewhere on here, and we've got one of the triangle ones on here as well. And so you can see that all of these parts in here have a single node connector somewhere on them. But obviously we need this triple one to do. We want to launch this right on our tank. So you go to the triple, but you'll notice there's no tank here. We've just got the two capsules and these adapters. So the thing that is most infuriating about trying to build anything here is trying to adapt one thing into the other. Now you might be thinking, well, we've got these hexagonal or heptagonal connector points. Surely I can connect these onto the other. And that is absolutely true. So in the tutorial it will give you this adapter, and this will fit like that. So now we see we have these hexagonal ones, but if we go here, we now have our fuel tanks. So they can go on like that. And again, we've got a 6 underneath, so engines. But we've just got this massive engine here. Obviously, that's not ideal for what we want. So what that tutorial will explain to you is it will give you this engine, but you'll see this has the double attachment, and this is where I really like the implementation of this. If I go to just one, you can see it's slotted on the two, and this is really clever. I really like the way this is implemented really well. One of the main differences for the symmetry, which by the way KSP 1 did not have in its first versions, it's C, not X. So obviously I can put 3 engines on here, and it's not saved. So the symmetry is a little bit flaky. You need to sort of have the symmetry set up before you do anything. Because the other thing is, in KSP 1, obviously I've now changed it to one-time symmetry. If I take this engine off, these other two stay here. This is not behaviour that you get in KSP 1. Then the trouble comes if you want to, change these, because now you've got more than one, and it can be quite difficult. And you have to take them all away, bring them back out, and put them out here. So editing parts is quite difficult sometimes. I think it probably depends on how you are used to the KSP 1 building system. But this is the main difference that keeps, why isn't this working? Oh, it's because I've done something wrong in this sequence here. So the other thing reason I recommended the tutorials is putting stuff sort of on side boosters. So I'm going to grab a large fuel tank here. Now, notice I have not put this down yet. You can see here on the configuration options, these here are these side points. You can pick and choose. And you can see here again, we've got the hexagonal, the heptagonal, and then these long attachment points. These long attachment points will be the ones that you want to connect to the side. So I'm going to put a 6 on here. So these are the sort of the long attachments here. And the thing that's interesting about this game that I feel is a kind of important part that's missing. So we go to coupling here. We do have radial decouplers. We've got this small one, and we've got this large one. And sometimes getting the connection right is a bit tricky, but just fiddle around a little bit. Again, these also have different attachment points. You may have noticed this Soyuz-esque thing here. This sort of connects onto these two, but we'll get there in a minute. But the thing is, to attach another booster to the side, you also have to give it the side attachment. Yeah, and so now we have our side boosters. Another thing that's really infuriating about this, there is no way to choose what order your fuel gets drained. I think there might be, but I have not figured it out. It's not. So another really interesting thing that I really like about this, the symmetry system here, because it does have some features that KSP 1 does not have. So I'm going to go to one-time symmetry, and you can see it sort of behaves as you'd expect, right? If we now go to 2, in KSP 1, if you have a one-time symmetry object on a 6-time symmetry object, it will just apply the 6-fold symmetry to that one object, and you'll have 6 of them. But this game actually handles it really well by letting you do this. And then obviously, if you do 3, you have 3. And if you're thinking the same way I am, you're thinking, what happens with 4? Because you can't split 4 across 6 things equally. It does it like this, which is really interesting because you definitely cannot do this in KSP 1. You'd have to do 6. You'd have to remove the symmetry from the 2 other ones, and then you still might have flaky behaviour with the symmetry. Now, if you got to 6, it fills on 4, and then 8, it just won't. It'll just go back to 1. Now, the other thing about this system that's really interesting is in KSP 1, if your engines, you need more engines, you can just shove more on there. You get a small octagonal strut, you put them on there, just kind of goes like that. With this game, you can't engine spam. You have to pick your engines quite carefully. So see, we've got this big one here, but you'll see it has no gimbal. It sort of would say where the alternator is here. So you have to pick your stages very carefully. And then see, if you look at this engine, it's got 3 in a row. So there are options where if I take the same engine here and put them on the larger engine, which obviously is quite complicated. There's only so many places you can put these. Obviously, you can put one in the middle, but then what are you going to put around them? And you can overlap these engines, even if it doesn't like it. But it will actually give you a tutorial in one more advanced, I think it's on the side boosters one, where you put a big heavy lift-off engine, but it doesn't gimbal, so you need to put 3 of these. And the other thing to really sort of pay attention to, obviously KSP 1 only has liquid fuel and oxidizer, but that's not the case in KSP 2, because KSP 2 adds hydrogen. So obviously, when we take this apart, obviously I've shown you the attachment points here already, but you can also see the fuel pairs. So we've got the white one is nothing, just a structural part. The sort of brown and yellow one, that's NTO and I can't remember. This is that's sort of the liquid fuel version here. But then we've got the black and the blue one, and that's actually liquid hydrogen. And these, again, follow real-world concentrations. So the liquid hydrogen one is much less dense, but it's much more efficient for the engines for it. So I'm going to pick liquid oxygen here, and I'm going to put this engine on, which is, you'll see, EGMH NTO. So this engine won't fire, but it will actually warn you. But then, of course, you may have noticed that, well, every time you take the part out is when the editing menu comes up. How do I change this stuff? Obviously, in KSP1, you can do the key points in the VAB for 1, 2, 3, 4 for the various rotate, offset, root part stuff. And these are the equivalents here. So we've got rotate, obviously, lets you rotate stuff. Grab is the default, that lets you sort of grab and move stuff. But now we've got select, this is the important one here. And when you do that, these menus will pop up. This will let you change the field times. And you can see this is no longer red. But you'll notice the side mount point option doesn't come up. This is extremely annoying because I'm like, oh, I need to put something on the side of this thing because I need some more. I need to change a 6 to an 8 symmetry. But it's this part in particular really bothers me. Spend a lot of time because then, like, you've got to take this off and put this back, and you go find it again in the menu, and you've got to click to there and click that one, and then that one, and then, and oh no, now it's mounted to the engine. The other thing you'll notice here is in KSP1 you can't build on things that aren't attached to the root part. KSP2 you can. This was obviously a big change that they made. You can have separate vehicles in the same VAB, and the same thing is true here. Obviously, you can see it's got a faint orange outline. It's probably a little bit too faint, actually. You can't really see it. But you absolutely can sort of put stuff on these things, and it will respect the sort of the attachment order. But of course, there's still a root part system. So for this engine, for this part, the engine is the root part. So then, like, trying to attach that to something might be a bit complicated. You might have to do this. But obviously now it's like, oh, and you might think to rotate, you move like this. You actually just go sideways. As you can see, that is what just I got confused about. As you can see, can't attach because that's not what it's trying to attach this part, but its nodes are sort of taken up. So that's the sort of the major difference here. And so if I go back to sort of my list of rockets here, you'll see Tesla Flight 1 was just sort of a incremental change, and see how big, what parts do I need. This was the smallest I could get an orbital vehicle. So like I said, this is a real scale solar system. So you can't just put a few fuel tanks and an engine and launch a Mercury capsule up into Kerbin orbit. It's not how this works. But again, because this system of nodes is quite restrictive in some sense, it's very hard to try and recreate a real rocket. So if you know a Saturn V can launch into orbit, and you attempt to build one at rough scale in realism overhaul, you will have the ability to get to orbit, but you can't do that in this game because there's not really any realistic way to mimic Saturn V. So you're really quite restricted on how big you can build, and obviously with the restrictive rigid attachment system, you can't just more boosters it. And again, there are no separatrons, and the decouplers don't really have the kick that they should do for their size. So it's really hairy dropping boosters, because unless you're pointing directly down your prograde vector, you are going to lose your core tank from a booster strike. I honestly don't know how massive a rocket you need to send this guy up to Jupiter, for example, because you can't refuel, you can't make more complicated stages, because you can't pull the fuel around. So you would have to monolithically launch the entire thing. And actually, there's an interesting thing about the staging that I want to talk about. As I've mentioned before, the complicated radial part system is that RCS ports are really tricky to do. So I did the old style Matnown lazy methods, or the ones that the Soviets used to use for the cellular stations. We just point them at each other and target lock, because there are obviously we've got orbit and surface up here in the Navball. There's also target, which is great because you just do the target retrograde, burn that way till your speed disappears, generate maneuver nodes, will snap to prograde and up and prograde, will snap to apogee and perigee. That doesn't work for closest approaches, which is a bit annoying, but you can get on with it. You'll also notice, obviously, I've got 6 engines on both these stages. This is the Test Flight 6 rocket that I used earlier. And obviously we've got the stages here. So you'll see that, like, even though both of these engines are on, and they were active when I was running the ship, if I actually thrust, only these ones turn on, because these are the only ones in the actual lowest stage, except that they're not. Because these ones are this one are the ones on the left, and these ones are the ones on the right. But the thing is, these are still both active. So the question is, why? What picks which one? Is it the fact that it's controlled from there? Because now if I do that, it's still those engines. Can't really tell what's happening. Spin around for a minute. Like I mentioned, these solar panels do not rotate. So obviously I've set these so these are offset, and in fact these only just barely recharge. I got pretty close. I think I'm down to about here on the resources bar. The other thing is, these are sort of the information panels. This is like, you sort of get this stuff with Kerbal Engineer or MechJeb, but this stuff comes sort of in the base game. Obviously, pressure, not that useful when you get into space, and general itself isn't even that much useful. And resources, the electricity is the only one in the game. The fuels don't turn up. I haven't tried RCS yet. We'll probably turn up there as well. But this is sort of the look of it. As you can see, it looks very much like KSP 2. The visual fidelity is way higher. So you've got, bokeh, and is that bokeh? This stuff. As you've got planet shine, and you may notice my computer does not like me pointing at the planet. I just circle a little bit. Versus if I go out here, it's way smoother. I believe this is because the game is using multi-threading for planetary surfaces. It can't remember if it's the CPU or the GPU that's doing this. In KSP 2, it's the GPU that does the surface rendering. This is a single developer pretty much who's made this. So to have something with the same visual fidelity as KSP 2 with a marked performance improvement, because this is not 5 FPS, which is what KSP 2 was giving me on this computer. I uninstalled it because it takes up so much space, and I can't bother to re-download it for this. But it was noticeably worse than this. So I'm going to do a launch of a Test Flight 6 rocket, because I think it's worth having an actual look as to what it looks like to do that. So again, this is the launch site here. It takes a second to load in, but again, the frame rate here is way better than KSP 2. For KSP 2, I basically would only fly the map view, and it would still be about 14 FPS at best. The map view here is very nice and responsive. And an interesting point here, again, you can see the default here. There are these two, there's one. You can see here the throttle. It's the same controls as KSP 1, shift to control, and even for the jump, so Z to full, X to 0. So we keep that full, and up and then down. If you look in the tooltips on in the builder, you'll see that these have like thrust limits. So they'll only go from 5 to 100%, for example. I haven't noticed that being an actual implemented factor yet. So you can still burn your engines super low, like you can in KSP 1 and 2. But again, something like mods like Realism Overhaul will remove the ability to do, because it's not realistic. Most engines have a minimum throttle somewhere in them. So again, we can see the same thing that KSP 1 does, which stacks up your stages, and then when they're active, they sort of split out here. You can also see the fuel icons here to sort of illuminate things. You'll also see delta V numbers for each stage. This is something obviously KSP 1 did not get until very, very late in its cycle, and this comes with them by default, which is really useful. You do have to mouse over these things to see the extra information. The touch to weight ratio is obviously quite a useful one, because it's not really illustrated. It will show up red if it's below 1, but that doesn't really help you because it's not like flagged like having the wrong fuel is. But then again, KSP 1, none of these things are shown at all. You'd have to manually calculate the delta V, and thrust to weight ratio is pretty much a guess, at least in the earlier versions of the game. So let's give this a shot. So one of the other differences with this game is the time warp. So there are no action groups. The time warp options are the 1 to 9 or 1 to 0. And the other thing, you can physics warp up to 10 times in this game by default. Again, this is something that KSP 1 requires mods to do. Better time warp will let you go up to 10 times physics warp. But now obviously we come up to the booster separation here. You kind of want to be posting prograde for this. As you can see, I'm currently not pointing progrades. When I stage, everything explodes. There are fairings in this game, but they are very difficult to use, and I've not had any luck, which is why this rocket doesn't have any. One of the other things that's noticeably different is you have to right click, you have to left click on these parts to get the menu to come up, not left click like you would in KSP 1. It doesn't do anything. I don't think these solar panels can be destroyed. Like it's the KSP 1, if you have too much atmosphere, they'll be destroyed. You can also stage accidentally. In fact, the tutorial for this building specifically says check your staging. There is, if you go to escape, there is obviously, it's not actually implied very much. Assembly shop is revert to vehicle assembly building, and space center is just go to the map center. So if you click this, it will undo this flight and take you back. That's not actually explained anywhere. I had to figure this out. We can't really talk about KSP-like games without referencing Juno, formerly Simple Rockets 2. The thing is, Juno has some features that KSP 1, 2, or Rocket Science don't have. Obviously, one of them is their scripting system, which I've never really used. I've preferred to use KOS for KSP 1. But also, some of the editing stuff is a lot different. So for Juno, you drag around with the right mouse, but obviously in KSP 1 and Rocket Science and in KSP 2, you drag around with the left, the right one, like this. You can see the icon there, you know what I mean? So I'm frequently, if I'm in here, I want to spin around like this, and you do that, and you go, oh, no. So it's just obviously you can change the controls, I presume, but I personally have always attempted to use the default controls for anything. So this is the kind of rocket you need. I think this was a lunar. Take this thing up to the moon. You see, it's way smaller because, again, Juno uses a subscale solar system. And also, Juno doesn't really have a space center. This is the space center here. This is the map view, right? There isn't really a map view thing as default that comes from the space center. You can't really see where your crafts are. Juno is Simple Rockets 2 heritage. It means it's a mobile game by Origin, which means that it's supposed to be more easily controllable in this way. But even so, the way the crafts move and respond in Juno, I have never really been a fan of. I think this might be a personal preference thing, but rocket science feels a lot more closer to sort of a movement response. You push a button for half a second, and subconsciously you know how much it should move based on KSP1. And Juno doesn't quite hit that. Rocket science does get there much more closely, and you can much more intuitively steer and do throttle control and stuff. Also, I was never particularly a fan of Juno's fully procedural tank system. Again, this is very much personal preference, but I like the limited options that you get in KSP1 and 2. Perhaps not quite so limited as in Rocket Science with its attachment system. Because then the challenge becomes fitting the rocket together rather than actually flying the thing. And you spend enough time in the VAB and KSP1 as it is. I've spent like 8 hours in there building something and spent an hour and a half flying it. It's just sometimes you want to actually play the game rather than VAB simulator. But yeah, so that's pretty much Rocket Science. I don't really know. I may have more details to sort of add in there, but for a single developer, it's pretty damn good. I'm hesitant to call it a KSP knockoff because it's clearly got some very original new stuff that KSP doesn't do at all with the attachment system. It's £16 US pounds, 20 USD on Steam. The music is custom made for the game. That's made by someone else. Some of the assets for the planets are from NASA and other places. I think I like Rocket Science more than I do Juno, which is quite saying something considering that. And obviously Juno has got a team. There's a whole dev team behind it, and they've been around a lot longer as well. So it's a much more mature product. Yeah, that's Rocket Science. Obviously, you may have noticed that the Rocket Science is kind of a generic name, and if you go into YouTube and you type in Rocket Science game, you will not find most of the videos of this. So in the description, I will manually select the game type for this video. So if you click on that box in the description, you'll see the other YouTube videos where people have also done that. Because of the name being a bit generic, it's kind of hard to find any information about it, which is why I sort of made this, because the more information about this, I think, the better. So, hopefully this was interesting. I will leave a link to the game's Steam page in the description. Happy launchings, I guess.